Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Well, that was an interesting conversation yesterday.
Yeah, how did it end?
Well, Tom dropped off. I couldn't read the guy at all. Very tough guy to read. I don't know whether he was annoyed at us or just annoyed at the world, but
Clearly the latter, potentially the former.
No, I was warned. Basically my other collaborators who I work with in VR know Tom. Like he's a name. Like he is a name. He's a very smart guy. But they also said he's somewhat unapproachable. So, Dale, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Very good. So, did you? I'm very curious. Did you have a chance to watch the geometric deep learning stuff, Matt?
I'd watched it a long time ago, not again.
Did you understand it then?
Parts of it, I mean, I can't claim to understand everything. I mean, I understand the spirit, but then it gets into all the nitty-gritty details. I guess you have to spend a lot of time. Like the book is an actual book, right? It's like more than 100 pages.
I haven't read the book. I'm doing the video series. They did an excellent multi-part video series where they present the book, which is very interesting. No, basically, I'll sum it up very, very quickly, which is it's, oh, here comes Rose, excellent. It's category theory meets deep learning, right? It's really is. Morning.
Good morning.
Yeah. No, we were just chatting about geometric deep learning. And now that I've spent a significant amount of time trying to understand category theory, it's all the same stuff. So it's really interesting that something as abstract as category theory is actually touted as the magic decoder ring of deep learning. But
Do they actually mention category theory? I don't remember hearing anything.
So late in the 3.5 hour
Okay.
street talk, machine learning street talk thing, the Russian gentleman, I can't remember his name and I won't pretend I can pronounce it, said that he is trying to climb the hill on category theory because he actually thinks category theory is actually more powerful than group theory. And
Yeah,
so
that came up earlier as well.
Yeah. So really interesting though. So to go back right to my blog post of last week, this is where all the prior art for what I was rambling on about is actually in geometric deep learning and in category theory, which I had no idea about. So yeah. Anyway,
Rob,
Rose?
did you find it useful? I know you were looking for like how like sort of a menu of deep learning architectures for different things. That's sort of, I remember why the geometric deep learning stuff came up last time. Did you like find it, I don't know, does it show you a direction to go, or
it explains deep learning to me in the first way that I've ever been able to understand it. Okay,
good.
And which is making the strong claim that I've never understood deep learning before. So yeah. So yeah, no, it's, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah. So the thing, I'm not all the way through it, about halfway through it, but the thing that jumped out to me is for the question of what is data? Sir, that perspective alone is really interesting. I mean, what we think about in sort of economics and finance is that the data we observe is the outcome of an optimization process, a theory, if you will. Either that, or we just sort of assume, we make an approximation that it's random.
That's interesting. I've never heard of data referred to like that. So that's surprising to me. I thought data was something you measure in the real world in some way. You count, you measure.
But wait a minute, you know, if there's this symmetry involved, that means that there's an underlying structure behind it. right? Or am I missing something here?
Nope.
No, I think that's true.
Okay, so can we uncover what that underlying structure has been? And that's sort of, in economics, that's sort of the rule of theory. But pretty much all our kind of agnostic empirical models, particularly time series type models, it just kind of sweeps all that stuff under the rug.
Isn't it because it's too complicated? We just have no idea of like where to begin. Like if you have a time series of, I don't know, financial data going up and down, I mean, I can't even begin to start thinking about symmetries. Like you just want to predict, that's probably the best you can do, unless you have a lot more knowledge about that particular process, right?
Yeah, no, very valid perspective, I agree. But at the same time, I'm kind of looking at it. I mean, I remember pondering these types of questions as a graduate student and kind of thinking, gee, this is a real black hole. This is not something you want to spend your time investigating. But fortunately, people with a lot more math knowledge than I have kind of made that journey. So, I don't know whether this stuff is really true or whether it's not, or, if it's true, how useful is it?
Do they actually claim that there is symmetry in your data? I don't think that's the claim. The claim is like, if you know the symmetry in your data, these are the ways to model it so that you don't go around like an idiot putting a fully connected layer on everything and try to learn everything super inefficiently. Like if it doesn't say that your data will have symmetries behind it. If it doesn't, then too bad. Like you're stuck with your old ways. But
if it doesn't have symmetry in the sense that they're talking about behind it, it almost means that it's sort of, random noise, doesn't it?
I guess it depends on what is your sense of symmetry. I guess if you go with like super simple symmetry classes, like if it's periodic, if it's whatever, if time translation invariant. But for example, like a picture where you have an object in an image, it does respect like space translation, right? So convolution is a good symmetry to assume, but it's not random noise. It doesn't mean it's symmetric in every possible way. I mean, if anything, random noise is the least symmetric thing ever, right? There is no symmetry in random noise.
That would kind of, or that's certainly one interpretation of it, yeah.
Truly random noise. Truly random noise. I would argue that an algorithm that generates pseudo-random numbers has symmetry.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, it's pretty subtle symmetry, depending on how good.
Okay, so their definition of symmetry, if you'll just bear with me for a moment, is really weird. So their claim is that if f of x equals x, then this is a symmetry. There must be a symmetry. Must be. So if I apply a function and it doesn't change anything, that is the definition of there being a symmetry. It's a really weird definition of symmetry.
Well, but I mean, this gets back to our discussion of fixed points too.
It does. It does. Yes, very much so. Yes. So what they're doing, just to spend 2 seconds on this, because it's really weird, is what they're saying is that we have some set of points here, right? Okay, and we have some other set over here. And this is my training data. Okay, so I have some domain, right? And these red points, these blue points are my training data. Okay, and I have a set of functions that can map those onto things in my output space. So let's say this is a label space. So this is label. So this is dog and cat. And this is image space, right? They're saying that we have a set, the Cartesian product of all possible combinations of pixel values in grids. right? It's a Cartesian crazy giant multi-dimensional space. And their claim is that the training data represents a set of functions that maps these certain configurations of these input space into points in the output space. Okay.
That's just the definition of classification, right? It's not a claim.
Wait.
It's a
Here
definition.
comes the punchline.
Okay.
All right. Now look at the top here, right? If f of x equals x, then there's a symmetry. There's two m's in symmetry, sorry. But anyway, so this here, where these two things map to the same value, are symmetric. So if I have two images that contains a dog, then they are symmetric because I can map them to the same point.
So doesn't that, I still don't understand your equation. Don't you mean f of x equals y? F of x equals x is just multiplying by 1, no?
Okay, so let's change that a little bit. Okay, I'll change that a little bit. This is the categorical thing, and I'll fix the word. I can't fix the word symmetry, so I'll just erase it. Sorry, just one sec. Any comments, Rose, while I'm babbling here? Okay, so what they say is that if I have f of x equals y, and this is y on the right now, or some lowercase label L, and I have f of some other x star, and that also equals the same label, then f of x is symmetric with f of x star, right? They are essentially isomorphic. They are the same thing.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Within a particular framework.
Within these two
Particular-
sets, this is
Yeah.
just set theory. These are just sets of points. Anyway, so that the approach they take is they say that if you pick some other point here, P, and you map it over here somewhere close to F, then we can essentially, if this is the closest point in this set of points to the point of F of P, whatever it is, some point P, this is F of P, right? I'm terrible at drawing text, but anyway, they're saying that you just find the nearest point and that's good enough. So when I look at an image of a dog, all I'm really doing is, or an image that I'm not sure if it's a dog, is I'm taking that image, I'm mapping it into the label space, and then I'm finding the nearest label to that point. And that's how you do predictive classification.
Sounds reasonable. I mean, I don't see anything different between any other classification except that they want to call it symmetry, but sure, I mean, call it whatever you want. I call it Bob.
So what
I
they're
don't see
saying
what
is
the
it
sense
doesn't
is
matter if the
symmetric.
dog is in the top left, or if the dog is in the bottom right, or if the dog is a dachshund, or a dog is a Labrador, or a dog is a terrier, or the dog is dead, or the dog is upside down, or the dog is,
Yeah,
they're all
that's the
symmetric.
classic.
Right?
Yeah,
Right.
it's a classic classification problem, right? You don't care about those things once you set the labels, right?
Right. That's very distant from my previous bad intuitive understanding of machine learning.
So how does this go against, I guess, your intuition? What was your previous intuition?
Okay, so the subtle part is how do you measure this distance, right? What does it mean to be close? And it's this definition of what it means to be close, which is where you have to define the manifold, right? Because you need to have some metric space by which you can measure closeness, right? And this is the underlying symmetry, if you will, the underlying manifold that you are trying to model, right? So you have a bunch of samples, this training data, that essentially definitively map onto this manifold of things, right? So the solution must be the perfect classifier must have all pictures of dogs in its manifold, so that whenever you show it any dog, because it is known to be a dog, it has to exist on the manifold of dogs, right? And so now we have a different problem where we have some n-dimensional, high-dimensional manifold, and we have a bunch of points on its surface, which are guaranteed to be on its surface. What low-order function can we use to approximate that? And that's when they get into Lipschitz functions. I don't know if you've encountered those, but
I really like the intuition that I don't know if you guys have come across kernel methods like SVMs, like that. Like before neural networks, they were all the rage. So the intuition there makes a lot more sense. And I think there's been some recent papers suggesting that they're equivalent, like theoretically. So basically, you can imagine a bunch of points, let's say whatever, blue and red, they're all mixed up together, and you want to classify blue versus red. So kernel methods basically learn these transformations that when you do it, all the blue points end up on the left, all the red points end up on the right, and you can linearly separate them. So the whole point is, how do you transform these points in a way so that they're linearly separable? The whole game is, how do you do that? And then neural network is one way of doing it, is this mapping. And then SVMs use something called the kernel trick, which is something, I guess, mathematically a little bit more complicated, but it works. I think that picture makes more sense to me.
okay. Yeah, it's just, they don't think about it in a continuous way. The only thing that's continuous is the manifold, this perfect kind of manifold of all dogs, if you will, or cats, or whatever, these perfect kind of shapes that are mathematically defined using a categorical concept called the universal
Approximation theorem.
No, it's not the universal approximation. It's the, sorry, they have a name for it. It'll come to me. Go ahead, Rob. Sorry, I'll think of it.
No, I was just trying to relate it back to the talk. And
so that what they're saying is there's some perfect function and we give up. Like in a 12,000 dimensional space, we're never going to approximate it. We're not even going to try, right? But what we can do is we can shrink that down to a space where we have these kind of smooth functions that we can then sum using neural networks, if you will. So we have these kind of smooth shapes that we can add together to create the manifold, our best approximation of the manifold that we can never know. And that's the best that we can do, which I think is a very, kind of humble approach to it, but it's very, very true, right? So they're not making any claim that they can do perfect classification of an image, because the curse of dimensionality makes that intractable. It's just not possible to do it. And so what you do is you don't try and do that. You say, okay, there's the space of all possible things. We're not going to worry about that super space. It's too hard. We're just going to restrict ourselves to, smooth Lipschitz, functions that don't have big spikes and wobbles all over them. And that has degenerated in machine learning to the ReLU, right? The regularized linear unit. And that actually is a perfect Lipschitz function, right? Because you can have, I don't know if you know what Lipschitz, I didn't know, I had to go look it up, I never knew, but basically what it means is that if you have a cone, it doesn't intersect the curve. I'll draw it for you. Sorry.
Yeah, but it's also non-differentiable at that inflection point, right?
So what they're saying is that in a Lipschitz function, if I have some really steep function, it will cross this cone more than once, and that's not a Lipschitz function, right? So we can't use these very, very steep functions. But functions where, like, I'll draw a ReLU here, right? So I can draw a really wide X here and never intersect myself. Even on this curve, I'll never kind of intersect myself if I look above and below in these two cones. And so that guarantees that the surface is smooth, right? It guarantees that it's not, it doesn't have any great big energy pulses in it. So they're essentially just doing a low, and they actually say this, they're just doing a low frequency filter in the Fourier domain. That's all it is. It's just weird that they're able to essentially relate all these different areas of mathematics into one unified view. They literally say that at some point. I can't remember exactly where it is. There's a lot of content. It's in that lecture series, I think. It might be in the video, but they basically say that the best that we can do is to do a low frequency best estimate in the Fourier domain to represent this n-dimensional manifold. It's really, really interesting. Anyway, I'm rambling now, but yeah, so their claim is this fixed point stuff is actually symmetries, right? And where I was hoping that we could get to, which I'm not sure we can, is relating that to causes and cause and effect. So one idea I had was, if you have an action in your actions, let's say I have 12 functions that I can apply to my object that move it around in the world. I can go left, I can go right, I can go, the cardinal directions up and down, whatever it might be. Okay. If I turn off one of those actions and I put the agent in the RL environment and it keeps getting trapped by the well, right? It just keeps falling in the well, and every time it falls in the well. And then I add a new action, right? Jump or something to its action space, and I notice that it never gets stuck in the well now. We can say that the action that is necessary in order for you to get out of the well, to get away from the fixed point in the manifold, is a cause. That's my bad, shitty claim. I'm not trying to defend it. I'm just trying to provoke a conversation around this. So if we have a convex manifold, like if it's just a cup, then we can find the minima, and that's the best one we can do. And we don't need any causes. We just need to optimize to the convex minimum, right? We just find the bottom of the bucket and we're done. And that's the best that we can do. But if we're in a situation where you have many maxima and minima, right, where there's lots of inflection points, we don't know which is the best one. And in the video series, they basically claim that the only way that you can know that is to look at every point, right? That's the only way that you can know that you found the absolute maximum, is to look at every point in the data set, which we can't do in image space. Like, it's just not tractable. So is there any relevance or usefulness in classifying functions as being causal or not? Right, what was the cause of your disease? Oh, I used to smoke cigarettes, right? That's if you take that function out of it, then they don't get lung cancer as often because there are other causes. But you see what I'm trying to get at? It's like, is it even useful to think about functions as being causal? Or is that the wrong, am I just off in the weeds? I could easily be off in the weeds. Does that make some sense?
Causality is usually like you can have a function that has a mechanism for that causality, right? So the other way around definitely is trivial, but I don't know, like, not sure I understand, I guess, how do you define a function as causal? Because a function by definition is a mapping, right? I mean, you could call that causality. Like, if you
I guess where I'm going
input,
is that if we have a regime that is very efficient, which can solve the convex optimization problem, and we know how to do that really well. If you solve the convex order, if you add a function to a convex optimization function that turns it into something that can optimize across any manifold, I would say that's the difference, right? So adding if I have a convex solver and I apply it to something which has many maxima and many minima, it's just going to keep finding a local minima and stop and say, this is the answer, right? It doesn't know that there are other things out there because it's designed to solve the convex optimization problem, right? What I'm saying is that functions that can move you between these convex optimizations are different in some way than the functions that can, maybe. This is my conjecture. That's that weird picture I was showing you last week, right? So not sure if that helps.
I guess I'm having trouble sort of translating back and forth between, I mean, we talk about functions, we talk about actions, we talk about causality. To me, I haven't made the connection to all. I guess that's what you're trying to do. I guess I need to think about, like, when you say actions, to me, that's a totally different problem setting than if you want to solve an optimization problem with multiple minima. Like, it's not clear to me there's an action. If it's action, there's got to be time. So there is no just one.
I see. Okay,
minimum.
so time's
like, without time, there is no action. So you mean you can call things action, like, and people do, right? Like the action of whatever, like changing the image to rotate it, right? I mean, you can call that an action, like but maybe it goes back to Wittgenstein, like we're misusing the words in a way that makes it confusing to communicate.
Easily done. I'm guilty as charged. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm just trying to give you a visual intuition. So if I know that I'm in this area here, I can apply a convex solver and get a perfect answer.
Yep.
Right. I know that because it has to be. Right. So if I could somehow detect moving across this complex manifold that I had essentially, I now have an ISO, a level set section of my manifold according to some gravity field, something I can optimize against vertically, then I can change the class of algorithm I need to traverse this. So what I'm trying to get at is that traversing in a convex space is a different problem than traversing in a complex space.
Oh, yeah, no argument there. I mean, I think most interesting problems are not convex, right? Like neural networks don't solve convex problems. Otherwise, we were done like decades ago, right?
Right. And what I'm trying to get at is that these kinds of things, the things that move you between these different kind of convex hulls, I'm saying that this somehow to me is some blend of causality and induction. I don't know. But I just see, I have an intuitive understanding in my own head that I can't seem to get rid of, and I'm happy to get rid of it because it's probably wrong, is that the functions that move systems between these convex hulls are in some sense fundamentally different than functions that operate well within convex hulls. Not a very compelling argument, but that's the intuition.
Well, before you characterize those as interventions, right?
Yeah, yeah. So if this is not present, if we don't have it, let's say that we were stuck in this one here, right? If these functions are not available to us in our action space, we're going to stay in here forever, right? We're stuck. We're going to die of lung cancer because there's no intervention that can prevent us from doing so.
So I guess perhaps getting back to some of Pine's comment, you draw a distinction between an intervention and causal. So the interventions are a subset of causal relations.
I think there's a middle ground, maybe. Right.
But here's what I get confused about. So in your picture with the multiple minima, like I don't think you need any new action to go from one minima to the other. You should just choose to go in the uphill instead of downhill. You don't need to, there's no any requirement to have a new action. You just keep doing the same thing just long enough and you're going to end up in the other one.
You mean in an RL type framework?
In any type, I guess, in any optimization, if you're stuck in a minima, you don't need a fundamentally new action. Like
if I'm stuck at the bottom of a physical well, I need a new action. I need a rope or a ladder. If I don't have a rope or a ladder,
well, now we're getting into limitations of human beings, but in numerical ways, like you don't need anything. You just keep taking steps in a different direction and you end up in the other one, right? That's extra stuff you're putting in if you want to say, okay, you can't go up a steep hill if it's steeper than a certain thing. That's a different problem. But mathematically, if you have a billion minima, all the space is accessible by just going left, right, up, down, and there's no difference.
Unless we choose to make a difference.
Yes,
right.
But then that becomes a different problem. Yeah.
No, I'm once again, I'm very, very thin ice. So, you know, this is not a strong argument. I'm just trying to get to a slight So I can't resolve Hume's problem of induction, right? To me, causal, like a priori causes, and I've read a lot of philosophy on this, in my mind, as best as I came up with, is just an isomorphism of the scholastic idea of the first, Aristotle's unmoved mover, right? This idea of the initial cause and this requiring it to be some deity. There's 2,000 years of people trying to make that happen. I'm not sure if Judeo-Pearl's intention was to do that, to try and reinvigorate scholasticism, but I can't get past Hume's problem of induction. So I don't think we can do causal discovery in a hard sense, but is there a kind of middle ground where we could do inductive, pseudo-fake, not very good causal inference that's better than nothing, that's sort of halfway in between, scholastic, the unmoved mover and pure induction?
No, I think we do that, right? Like as humans, we do that. So there's obviously an existent proof for it. I think we all have very good intuitions about cause and effect and many daily things. Like might fail us in medicine or other things that are more complicated, but like we obviously we get the useful. So I don't think we need to solve the philosophical problem of like what is exactly causing what 100% of the time.
Right, and I don't think we can. Is my point. Like trying to do that, quite frankly, in my opinion, is stupid. Like you get stuck in this. Sorry.
Going back to one of the things you said is interesting. Like I'm trying to understand, like at least in reinforcement learning, you have to define your actions before you start the problem. Like the set of your affordances or possible actions is part of the problem. Like I wonder if there is a setting where you could create new types of actions. That's interesting. Like I don't know, like if you're in a maze, you go left, up, right, down, and that's all you can do, or maybe do nothing, wait. And that's all the possible actions. And then you can go, run your optimizer or do whatever you want to do. But you wanted to create a new action called jumping, which was not part of your action list. So that's not possible right now, I guess, if you haven't identified all your actions a priori, you haven't started the problem yet. So I wonder if there is room for discovering new types of actions that is not in your action space to start with.
I guess I was wondering if what David is describing is almost like reductionism, that you're taking a problem and you're defining the problem in a particular way. And what the game is right now is of the actions, interventions you have using this description of the problem, is it still useful? But you hit a point where it's no longer useful. And so you need to find some other way to look at this problem. And so you're looking for a different model, a different set of actions, and you need to sort of turn back on the explore. Let's go outside and find a different way of looking at the problem.
I'll try and say the same thing in a slightly different way. System one can get you pretty far, right? But then it will reach a fixed point and truly not know what to do next, right? It doesn't know what to do next. Like, okay, I went to sleep and I woke up now. Now what, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to get at is we have another system. We do more. When we wake up, we do get up and do stuff and make breakfast, but have a cup of coffee, all the other stuff that we do, right? And that's not system one, right? That's this kind of effort of lifting it into some other cognitive system that we then, move from one thing to another. But as soon as we get to a point where it's a convex optimization problem, we can just hand it off to system one and just switch off, right? And we can go for a walk or walk the dog or make a cup of tea, and system two is not there, right? It's completely switched off. And so I'm trying to understand this idea of, okay, I think I understand it when system one reaches a fixed point, like when we've essentially, the action space that we've given system one doesn't do anything anymore. We need to lift up to some other system. And I'm trying to work out if a good way of thinking about that is this idea of convex hulls and essentially reaching a fixed point in a convex hull and then trying to, once we've reached that fixed point, that's a trigger for lifting of some sense.
Yeah, I'm wondering if like what you're trying to do or what anybody is trying to do is to constrain the search space at any period of time. So you might have gotten to a point where you're like, is this a cat or is this a dog? And realizing actually it's neither. I'm going back and forth here because I don't know if it's a cat or a dog. This is giving me indication that this is something else. So maybe at that point, handing it off to say, okay, do I need to stop trying to look at ears or something else to distinguish is it a cat or a dog? Do I need to look at some other set of rules to broaden my search space or change my search space?
To genetically
I'm
evolve.
looking at.
Perhaps.
Do I need to bring in tigers or lions, or do I need to look at something else entirely? These are cartoon characters, for example. And so jump to a different part of the search space.
Right, and that's the idea.
A
right?
jump,
like get out of here and go somewhere else.
I wonder if it's maybe even more than that. Like, if you have any sort of machine learning algorithm, any whatever algorithm, you specify the problem, you unleash your solver, and it tries to solve the problem for you. But you're saying you maybe you misidentified the problem. Like maybe there are things that are not cats or dogs in your data set, which means your problem is not the right problem you're trying to solve. There's nothing wrong with the algorithm. So basically now you need to step back and redefine the whole problem. So I would view it as maybe having totally different landscape now, not the same one you had that you go from one minimum to another. You're basically switching problems. And then again, you're going to go find another function that does it for you.
Okay. Good comment. I think about that. I mean, I could see, I think we'll see this in systems biology. I can see that there are biological circuits that can solve convex optimization problems really well, right? So maintaining your glucose in your bloodstream is a completely autonomous system that works really well, right? But there is a higher level, if you will, like we need to, it's a system of systems kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Machine learning just kind of puts it all in one big bucket and just says, well, that's the problem, right? Just solve the big problem and, we'll just deal with whatever. We'll just solve everything.
But I guess that's the maybe this is related to the whole is versus odd problem that Hume brought up, right? Like machine learning doesn't tell you what problem you should solve. You pick it. If you pick the wrong one, it's going to solve the wrong one very well for you. It's not the fault of machine learning that you misspecified your problems, you misspecified your labels, you don't understand your data. It has nothing to do with machine learning. This is just a tool you use to optimize things. And if you put it on something that doesn't make sense, you're going to get nonsense coming out of it, right?
Right.
I guess where I would argue with that is, can we use machine learning to help us to see when we've defined the problem incorrectly?
Well, if you get results you don't expect, I mean, does that count? Like if you run it, you get weird results, then you say, oh, I did something wrong, then you go back.
Yeah, or I guess the categories or the classifications that we have come up with, like if we can go out and research across vaster data and realize like, oh, like these categories that we came up with, that they're just not right? And there are these other discoverable categories that might actually be more useful in this situation, that might be at a completely different layer of abstraction, right?
And perhaps the way that we could define that is as a causal DAG, I'm suggesting.
Yeah, and different levels, the sort of hierarchy of causal DAGs, right?
Right. So, like if I know that I'm in this fixed point, like if I'm in an oscillation and I'm just going back between these two things, right, and I'm not escaping, right, if I could somehow identify that behavior from a higher level and that triggers a function which is a meta function, right? It's a higher order function, which just says these lower order functions aren't behaving as they should, okay? And at this higher level, this management function, if you will, then says, okay, let's stop, right? Because this will just go on forever, right? So we're going to stop, and then that takes you to a fixed point because you have no actions left. So where are you going to go next? Well, I'm going to go and explore, right? I'm going to go from this state, which is I got stuck, to some other state. And now I'm kind of in this state motif, rather than this manifold, maybe.
Like I'm thinking about hugely complex patients who have multiple issues going on. And you see this a lot of the time with older patients who have like chronic heart disease and maybe kidney failure and diabetes. They have a whole bunch of stuff, right? And they get to a point where each specialist is trying to handle their problem, and they're playing with the medications that they know, and they're trialing things. And you touch something over here, and then it has a huge impact. Like you change a kidney medication and it has a huge impact on the hand. And they kind of get to the point where they just sort of, they throw their hands up, and it's like everybody's terrified to touch the patient and change anything, because it's like, I don't know what's going to happen here. Or worse, people just like, well, I know for my cardiac problem, these are my 5 actions that I can take, and I'm going to take this action, without sort of thinking about the bigger picture. And maybe if we could redefine how we're looking at the entire set of data, not thinking of it in specialties, I feel like there might be some value in a situation like that to what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
In case of medicine, isn't that like just because we just don't understand the human body well enough to know these things? Or is that people like not thinking enough and all the information is there, nobody's looking at it?
I think it's systemic in that it's the way we've come to think about the problems, define the problems, and do the research. And so like a lot of the way randomized trials are done, a lot of the most complex patients are filtered out. So you sort of trial, this medication is going to do this for cardiac patients, but it's not necessarily understanding that for the more complex patients. Right. So we reduce the problem to where it's simple, and then we expect that same action is going to work in the same way. And we're almost getting into narrower and narrower silos within the specialties, right? And that's kind of, I feel like where we've hit with healthcare, is that the most sick patients have all of the conditions. Like if you look at somebody who's 70 years old and has heart failure, kidney problems, like watching them keep those patients alive, it's like, oh my God, like it's so stressful for everybody.
This is a very utilitarian approach, right? It's better to have one patient with 100 conditions and 100 patients with one condition each, I guess. Is that's how you get most number of healthy people overall.
Fair comment. And I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that is a fair comment. Right, the most amount of happiness for the most number of people. Yeah.
Which I don't like at all. I'm completely against utilitarianism, but I'm
no,
just saying
but your point is valid, Payam. Like,
I think most science is based on that, I guess. Yeah, that's why you throw away outliers, right? Because you want to sort of fit most of the data most of the time, and you choose to live with the outliers.
I guess the point that I would make is, if you are looking at all the data, maybe that's not such a big deal, but when you have a selection bias from the very beginning, like, and then you're making these decisions based on a very small section of the data that doesn't apply in reality at all.
But I wonder, I mean, a lot of that is like just pragmatism, right? I mean, you can't have access to all the data. You can't try to fix all the problems at the same time. So you just pick one, and depending on your budget and whatever your financial status of your company, you choose.
So I guess I'm wondering if I sort of thought that with access to a lot of medical data, if we can give up some of the ways of thinking about problems that we have and look at it in a different non-specialty way, maybe we would come up with different answers. I'm not saying I know how to solve it. I just sort of feel like maybe there's an opportunity there. Whereas
this is the kind of data that, for example, you have access to. It's not publicly accessible. It's like accessible by select few within big companies, I guess, right?
I guess what I would say about that is that it's also even really hard. And this is one of the things I didn't understand when I first started working with health data, is the data is so curated from the very beginning, right? Like the data is structured because of the specialties. And so getting access to purely objective data measures, it's very difficult because everything is defined in terms of diagnosis and who this patient is a cardiac patient, this patient is a, whatever. There isn't a ton of objective, purely, I don't even know how to say it, not non-paradigm enforcing data out there.
Do you have a list yourself that, like, if you had to do it and they give you unlimited budget and time, like, can you make a list of things that we should do better just based on your knowledge?
No, I mean, I think I'm still learning. I mean, I had no idea. I think I had a very naive view of what health data was going to look like.
I mean, but the problem you phrased, does seem to be testable. So, suppose the conjecture is that if you look at it from a particular specialty,
Mhm.
You tend to ignore other stuff. So that should show up overall in outcomes.
I think it does.
So, yeah, so you should be able to say, okay, if you look at it from a kidney perspective versus a heart perspective, what leads to better outcomes? So I do think that's probably testable.
Is it unethical to essentially explore with a given patient who has multiple treatments ongoing to essentially switch off one of them and see what the implications of that drug have on that patient? Like, let's say you switch them to a placebo and they didn't notice any change in their health condition, and nor did you. You could essentially take that drug out of the regime and keep doing that in a subtractive manner until you can clearly identify that the presence of this drug is having a measurable effect. I'm not saying you need to do this over years and years, but perhaps you could do it as a trial. So this is essentially, you've got a conflicting action space, and the actions are essentially canceling each other out, but also having being secondary causes of bad outcomes, right? So can we try and build a correlation between different regimes of treatments and the way that they interfere with one another, and try and develop some better way of doing this? I don't know.
That reminds me of another house episode. So two people got the same disease, and there was a 50-50 chance that one drug or the other will be the right one to use, and the other one might be deadly. So he wanted to give one drug and the other one the other, so to maximize one of them surviving. And the legal team basically told him that's a no, you can't give two different treatment to the patient with the same thing. You have to choose. And they said, well, there's no reason to choose one or the other. He said, well, it's too bad. Of course, he went on and did it. But yeah, I guess there are legal issues and then there's ethical issues. Those are two separate things. I feel like the whole field of medicine is run by lawyers more than it's run by doctors. I don't know if you agree with that, Rose.
I mean, I think there's standard of care is it's difficult, right? Because it is kind of the explore exploit problem, right? If you have something that there is some evidence to show that this is beneficial, and then that becomes the standard of care, if in reality, is it really beneficial to the people that it's being applied to, right? It's very hard to unwind that, right? Once it becomes standard of care, then how do you choose not to give it? And especially if you're talking about these patients they're already in a very fragile state, right? You don't want to cause somebody to die from heart failure because you've taken some medication away. And so you're not very motivated, I would say, as a practitioner to explore, right? Or to explore in any setting other than, randomized control trial where you have a ton of support behind you.
Yeah.
And I think maybe, which is where the data piece of it comes in, right? Because some patients will take it upon themselves to decide, like, this is not what I want, right? Or they will make selections about what interventions they want or they don't want. And if we have enough data, maybe you can start to find some stuff there without having a practitioner actively make a decision to not follow standard of care.
Yeah, there's probably enough heterogeneity in treatments you could discern that from the data. But if I put on my business development hat here for a moment, this is a real problem. If people have ideas about how to approach this, lots of interest. Let me just leave it at that.
Which problem again? Can you say?
Well, okay, so drug interactions, sequences of treatments. Do you deal with the heart problem first and then the kidney? Which, if you're going to try and optimize around dosage levels, where do you start?
So I'm trying to induce a framework where we could have useful conversations about this through this crap I'm rambling on about. But I'm not saying that's right. But that's my intention, is to try and give us a language where we could attempt to address such issues. And I think we're doing quite well, actually. Rose was able to articulate very, very clearly her issues. So the conversation is certainly very valuable, I find.
Here's a question I would like answers to. I think that it would help if you had the answer to it. So let's say you go to a doctor, you have multiple conditions, you ask for advice, they give you some sequence of treatment. I want to know the gap between that sequence and the sequence if that doctor had to give the treatment to a member of their own family or their own kid. And I wonder how big that gap is. Like that I think is very illuminating. Like, because I every time I talk to a doctor, which I've talked to many of them, I get a feeling that they know more and they want to do something, but their hands are tied by standard of care, by legal issues, lots of different things. So some of them are a little bit more cavalier and maybe they try to do a little bit of experimentation to help you out. The others just focus on, covering their ass. Like, if you die, it's not their fault, they followed the rules. And I think that gap is going to be very telling And of course, it's totally possible that they would do something more aggressive for their own kid and it ends up killing the kid, right? You could do wrong by being too loving as well. So that's also there. But yeah, I'm just curious. Like, I don't have too many doctor close friends who are willing to talk about it. But a few times I've seen very big differences in suggestions for people if you ask someone versus someone who is in an official position.
I mean, I think it's a really hard problem because we've sort of come to a place in our world where we believe that evidence gives us very high levels of certainty. And certainly from where I'm standing, evidence is often it's a very simplified view of what actually happens in reality. And we don't have the same, or we shouldn't have the same level of certainty when we're applying it in very complex situations. And so then it comes down to individual values to some degree too, right? Like, some people want really, really aggressive treatment and other people don't want to be in hospital, would prefer to die 10 years earlier, but have at least lived a good life up until then, right? And so it's really complicated when you're trying to put standards and processes in place that are, again, sort of how do you make the decisions for the population in general? So none of those are easy to, they're just not easy decisions to make for anyone. And I think we are getting better maybe about including patients in the decision making themselves and understanding a patient's goals of care.
But I mean, goals is one thing, but there's a problem I constantly struggle with, right? Like, let's say you look at the studies, like, I mean, I'm just using medicine as an example. Let's say there's some trial, 500 patients, they tried something and it ended up being significantly, statistically significant that this drug works. And let's say you're a doctor and you go start prescribing it and your first 5 patients don't do well. What do? Like, if you go by evidence, you should say, okay, this is just anecdotal difference. Maybe I got unlucky. I should keep going. But as a, like, I would say in that position, I would start doubting the study and I would maybe go with my own experience, which is limited, but it's my experience. I feel like I know better. And that constantly happens in different contexts for me. Like, you read up something, there's a study, there's science, but then you experience something over and over that goes against it. And I guess different people have different thresholds when they trust themselves versus what they read, or even if it's like a sort of a credible source. I mean, how do you guys deal with this sort of thing? Because I feel like I too much rely on my own experience, even if it's anecdotal. And maybe some people are the other way. They too much rely on the scientific studies, but I don't know if there's a right answer, but what is a good strategy? How do you think about this?
I feel like as a society, we've been encouraged to give up our own experiential view of things and just trust somebody else. And I feel like that's a really bad thing because you don't know who's influencing how the, formal expert decision has come about. And so I tend to, certainly look at the evidence and try and see if there's a reason why my experience might be different to that. But when I'm making my decisions, I have to rely on my experience, not on what somebody else is telling me, like, this is the way the world is.
So Payam, in your case, if you've got a sample of 500 and you're looking for a statistically different outcome, that is the same thing as running a linear regression on a single dummy variable for the group membership. Okay, now, in order to get a significant test statistic on that dummy variable, you're probably going to have an R-square in that regression of, I don't know, 0.03 or something like that. Okay, so if you back that out, that means 90% of the variation in the outcome is due to results outside of the test. So, you ought to put more weight on your priors.
Yeah, I mean, I made up the number 5. I didn't want to pick 5 billion because then I would be ridiculous to like go with my own experience. I wanted to keep it more gray.
No, if it's 5 billion, then the problem gets worse.
Yeah.
And I mean, most of these clinical studies that I've seen, you've looked at a lot more of than I have, Rose, but yeah, I mean, if you look at, implicit R-square out of them, it's pretty low, generally 5% or less.
So I'll take it a slightly different direction. No, I'm not disagreeing with you, Rob. So have you heard the term epistemic luck? Do you know what that is? Rose,
Yeah. I think it's the same idea as like the same or similar studies are run multiple times, right? But a lot of research stays indoors because it doesn't support what people in general think. And they're like, I must have made a mistake here. And so a lot of the time with studies, you have a certain amount of luck that you're getting the result that you want. And if it gives you the answer you want, then you publish it. And yes, you have support, right? You have evidence there for that. But a lot of the time, if people get the answer they don't want, they're like, oh, we must have made a mistake. There's a mistake here somewhere. And they don't, try.
So they talk about it in the Enigma of Reason. They talk about this idea of epistemic luck. So there's this very tragic case where this African-American woman had a car accident and she crawled out of her car and banged on somebody's door and they shot her because they thought that she was trying to steal from them, right? Now, that story, if the person banging on the door was somebody who'd come to kill them and then they shoot them, then the outcome is the same, but the story, the reason is very different. And so, you know, if this person kills this other person and then they claim that the reason that they did it was luckily right, then they've had what's called epistemic luck or bad luck, right? So there's somebody wearing, like a kid running around with a toy gun after his friend, and a policeman sees it and says, stop, and the kid, you know, why are you talking to me? And so the policeman shoots him. That's epistemic bad luck. The policeman is not acting in an evil or bad way, it's just bad luck. But so there's an argument to be made that science itself is epistemic luck, right? So we go out to the world, we collect a bunch of samples, we come up with a theory, and then we promote the theory to everybody else, and everybody else finds that the theory is right, okay? And when they do other experiments, they actually match your description. But what's not often said is there are also 16,000 other descriptions of basically the same thing in the literature. It's just a random sample, right? So these reasons, these models that we come up with are essentially stochastic. They're not deliberate.
I would take it a step further. And in many disciplines of research, there are strong, you know, they get set up, but there are strong priors or biases to generate certain types of results.
Yes.
And there was an interesting example of people doing work in psychology, where there was a group who went back and identified like the 100 most influential papers in psychology, and then tried to replicate them, and they could only replicate basically half of them.
Right.
There's also p-hacking, right? I mean, that's well known that it's happening.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't, very seldom do you get published for producing a insignificant result.
So there's some systemic issues here.
Yes, that's my
for
point.
Sure. Okay, so what can we actually try to do? So I was going to look at the financial data that Rob gave me. I've been looking at that, and I can share. Do you mind if I share some of the stuff I was doing?
No.
So let me fire it up here.
And I should be able to join you guys, maybe not this week, starting the following week. So the proposal I'm working with is
always
almost
welcome.
finished.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let me just fire this up here, but
As well as you, Rose.
of course, if you have the time. But
What, I don't know what you guys are talking.
oh, we meet at Wednesday mornings at 8 p.m. Pacific time for an hour.
AM.
No, AM.
AM, yeah.
11 o'clock my time.
Yeah.
To discuss.
Well, Rob's been teaching me about economics. All right.
And David's been teaching me about everything else.
It's fine. Okay, so I'll share this with you very briefly.
So the gist of it is we're trying to investigate machine learning models for time series data. And what I've observed from looking at other results is that the models, the machine learning models tend to work well in cross-sectional data. In other words, a whole bunch of observations at a single point in time. But if you look at time series data, they tend not to work well. And kind of standard statistical models seem to outperform them. But there's a new class, and this is, you know, related to the geometric
Deep learning
part. Yeah, symmetry part. There's a new class of models that try to incorporate that symmetry, and they seem to be doing better than anything else.
So which model class exactly is that? I guess David is about to show us.
Sequence to sequence models.
Okay.
So Rob sent me some papers on it.
Like transformer stuff.
Yep, transformers.
Self-attention, yeah, self-attention, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just run you through this 2 minutes. So basically, the underlying kind of principal mathematical model of a stock market stock price is geometric random walk, right? So my hypothesis is that every morning when you wake up, you essentially renormalize, all right? So my share is essentially worth $1. And then on a given day, it'll go up by 3%. And then I'll wake up the next day and I'll say, okay, essentially I'll renormalize that to $1. And we keep doing this, and that creates this exponential growth in the stock market. It's just this renormalization process. I'm not saying that the stock market isn't growing, but the fact that the stock prices go up exponentially might be due to this renormalization, or it might be that we're much more productive. I don't quite know, but the underlying principle is that we have this thing called a geometric random walk. We can fit that to Arima, and we get
So an Arima model are these standard statistical time series models.
right. And we get the classic fat tails that Taleb tells us all about, right? And so what I'm doing here is I'm essentially doing log differences. So I'm trying to get rid of the renormalization to see if we can see the actual underlying signal that isn't just being geometrically amplified, and it works to a degree, right? So this is fairly linear. And then we can do something called wavelet analysis, which I'll come to in a minute, and you'll see that we basically just get a line coming out of it, right? So we can get rid of the high frequency noise, and we get back to something that is essentially linear. Now let's apply it to a real stock price. So we're going to do exactly the same process, but we're going to do it on Apple stock. So there's its geometric random walk. That's the wrong parameter, so let's not worry about it. I then take the log of the difference of the values, right? We then apply the wavelet analysis, and we get something very interesting, which is we turn this signal into this signal. So what I'm trying to get at here is that the underlying, what we were talking about much earlier, we have this convex. So the stock market, Arima models, and very smart people on Wall Street have huge data sets and very, very good models for exploiting patterns in the data, seasonal patterns, all sorts of different patterns in the data. If it is knowable and known, then somebody's already exploiting it, right? So you don't get any benefit really in trying to beat the market by looking at seasonality and other things. And you have to look at all of them in order to even play the game, but you can't essentially claim that there's anything periodic or symmetric in the data that isn't being already exploited. So what occurs outside of those symmetries? Little shocks, right? Exogenous actions that essentially perturb the system in a way that is unpredictable and is not in any periodic or symmetric structure. And these shocks can be modeled as wavelets. I don't know if you know what wavelets are. Basically, it's just a sine wave under a Gaussian, right? So basically so a new piece of information comes out, it propagates into the world, everyone knows the information, then because everyone knows it, there's no benefit having the information, so essentially it fades away. So you have this ramp up, and then this ramp down, that's a wavelet. And if we remove all these little shocks from the system, in one case, when the random variable, we get this smooth curve here. But in a real world case, we get these perturbations, right? These pulses that are much more significant, which are from exogenous forces, which can't be predicted. So system one, right? And system two, right? So system two is coping with these unpredictable events, and we're lifting that up, and we're taking an action, and then we're dropping back
So what
down.
can you do with this? I guess I missed the, so what did you learn from here? Like what?
So there are actions in the action space of the stock market, but these exogenous actions that are causing these spikes to occur. If we already had a system that could anticipate these spikes and leverage that, they essentially would be gone. We wouldn't see them in the market because, smart people would immediately take advantage of it, and it would be smooth. You wouldn't get these spikes. So these spikes.
Is this evidence of like inefficiencies in market that you can potentially exploit?
No, this is evidence of exogenous events which we cannot predict.
But how do you know you cannot predict just because you didn't predict it?
Okay, so the underlying assumption is there's lots of really smart people with lots and lots of really data who are working very, very hard in Wall Street to make these predictions. And if they can make the predictions, they will. And if they can exploit them, they will. And so we will not see big lurches in the market. So essentially, what you're seeing here is unexpected or unanticipated information perturbing the system strongly. And because there's all these very smart actors out there trying to exploit this, if this information was known to them a priori, they would have exploited it and we wouldn't see the spikes. So this is essentially an attempt at trying to measure the exogenous actions, these actions that take you out of these stable pockets, if you will, in a real world system like the stock market. So
these seem to be, I guess, dissipating fairly fast. So doesn't that mean that lots of people got rich off of every one of these spikes and the smart people are just doing fine?
No, the smart people go, oh, that's new. Okay, let's learn about that. And then we go back.
Yeah, so they quickly learn from it and potentially make money from it, right?
Absolutely. But then once again, as the information propagates out into the market, everyone clicks through, and the whole thing becomes flat again, right? Mm-hmm. So this mechanic works, right? So if we have a set of systems that have prior knowledge and are able to make good predictions, that's great. But then there are these unanticipated shocks to the market, which none of the models incorporate, and we can see them because the system responds, right? The system has a strong reaction. This might be also relevant in healthcare. Can we apply the same type of thing to somebody's health over a period of time? The other thing that this gives us, which I think is really interesting, is a timestamp, right? We can look at this perturbation and we can go and look at the news and find out what the cause was, right? What was the cause of this great big spike, right? And that's what I'm trying to get at with this idea of the, coming out of the stable feedback loops, right? When the feedback loops that are in place can't compensate for the incoming exogenous signal, the systems go out of balance in a radical way, but then quickly readjust, right? But the underlying systems could not anticipate the shock.
But I wonder, I guess there's still something I don't quite understand. So let's say I have some stocks, like right before that huge spike. Let's say I have some stock. I know nothing about that event that's about to happen. It happens. You get a huge spike in the prices. Let's say I don't even read the news. And then a couple of weeks later, I come back. My stock has been steadily going up as usual. I don't even need to know what happened, right? So it is true that if I had known the big spike was happening, maybe I could make a lot of money out of it. But if you just ignore a whole bunch of these, maybe you're still doing pretty well and you don't care, right? Is that the sort of moral of the story?
It's the time scale question.
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. So if you want to make money over the next 10 years, let's say, you can probably safely ignore some of these spikes, unless, I don't know, there's World War III, that's a different story.
I think is the point that once these spikes happen, people try to understand what happened in there and then predict it the next time around.
That's right. That's right.
So things that we didn't have a causal structure for, we sort of put together a theory, and then the next time things are aligning to cause that again, we get ahead of the market and we predict.
That's true, but there's another part of this, that the markets actually tend to forecast the events rather than respond to them.
Right. Yes.
So you'll see stock prices move down in advance of recessions. So the data on the recession comes out afterwards.
And they could also cause recessions, right? But if people think there's a recession coming, you can bring it about by, selling all your stocks, right?
Yeah, that happens sometimes too, but generally it goes the other way. So it's not a foolproof. You're correct.
So that's the kind of interesting point about creating the reality, right? Like if you have a loud enough voice, you can basically create what's going to happen in the future.
You can induce it, yes.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, it depends on the market. So there's some markets in which that's absolutely true. U.S. Treasury securities. The Fed decides what they want to be, what they want the interest rates to be, and they manipulate the market till they get the outcome they want.
Mhm. Like if you look at what happened during the pandemic to the stock market, right at the start of that, I think everybody thought that, and it did for a short period of time, right, that the stock market was going to drop.
Yep.
And then suddenly it's going in completely the opposite direction. And there isn't really a good explanation other than I think certain people wanted to prop it up.
Yeah, I mean, this is perhaps a conversation we should have at another day, a little bit over time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you my version of what happened and why, but
Right. Okay, well, it sounds
About
like,
it next time.
this is a fairly fruitful, like, what do you think of the idea of trying to create this separation between these kind of convex or low-level systems that are already in a positive feedback loop or a negative feedback loop that are self-stabilizing, right? So these things that automatically by themselves just always converge on a 0 point. But they're essentially trying to draw a distinction between these feedback loops and then these other higher level constructs. I was thinking they might be causal. I don't think they are because of the a priori condition that Pearl applies, or go back to Aristotle or Kant, whatever you want. I'm not talking about a priori causality, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about missing information.
Mhm.
Right. So we have a system which has a certain amount of information, and based on that information, it's optimal. But then a new piece of information comes along and the system is perturbed in a way that it has no memory of, and it needs to essentially either move to a totally different system or incorporate new actions into the system. I don't know, but it's not causal. Like, I'm not trying to say that this is a priori causes first mover, blah, 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 Aristotle, and that's not it. It's somewhere in between. It's somewhere between the two.
You guys might enjoy this book that I just shared. I'm reading it. It's really cool. I think it relates to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. Let me know if you have a hard time getting it. I can probably find a PDF. Like, I had to wait a long time. It came from Australia. It's like an old book. It's very small, readable, but it's all about how, like, I mean, you can see from the title, like, it's about the details in every system and the implication for the bigger picture emergent. And it goes through like specific examples. It sort of criticizes the way philosophy of science is been maybe not done properly because of ignoring some of the relevant details. Like philosophers overly simplify the conceptual things to talk about the big picture and missing some of the important details. Therefore, the title of the book.
I can get it on Kindle, so that's great. Yeah, very good. My recommendation is
I get it from the library. That price.
My recommendation is also that you take a look at the geometric deep learning stuff.
Can you throw the link for that in the chat, actually?
Sure. Let me do that.
Which one? Yeah, did you watch? There's
The 3.5.
now.
Well, I'm actually going through the lecture series now, but it's the YouTube. It's the one you sent me home. So yeah.
The street talk, the machine learning street.
Yeah,
talk.
the street walk. That one. Yeah.
Yeah, I always struggle with that one. I find it super interesting, but it's so dense with so much information and lots of things they talk about for 3 hours. Like, they don't give references for all the, like, everything. I find it really hard to like get something out of it beyond just enjoyment of like listening to it.
Do you have another reference that you feel like is more digestible?
That's the online course, but it's hard. It's not
Okay.
easy.
But there was that Neurip's talk that he gave, right?
There's
I thought
also
that was a
Neurip's
good-
talk, which I actually attended. Yeah.
Yeah, that might be a better bet.
Yeah.
I mean, I found that, you know, again, I'm not all the way through it, but I found it a little kind of rambling from my perspective.
It unfortunately gets really good right at the end.
Okay.
Right. So yeah. So it gets really interesting right at the end, yeah, super interesting stuff. I'm finding category theory is the huge helper that I needed to understand it. So yeah, it's very, very interesting. Cool. All right.
Yes, this is also if you want a slightly shorter version, so this was presented at a conference. I think it's a little bit higher level, but they all just talked about the same thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So what do we have any suggestions of where to go next for next week? Or I actually had, last week was just a nightmare. I was so busy making movies, but yeah.
Making movies, cool.
Yeah, sure. You want to see
Are
it?
you
It's
gonna
pretty
watch
fun.
it on Netflix or?
I'll show you the movies I made. Let me do that.
Guys, I'm going to have to go.
Yeah, no problem, Rose. Okay.
I'll try and get to these YouTubes this week. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
All right. See you, Russ.
I'll just show you these movies very quickly. I can't actually show them over, I can't send you a link, but I can kind of transmit them in chat. So how do I do that? I'll just show this one. Yeah, this is the big one I did. This one. It's not showing it to me. It's weird. So strange. One sec. Sorry. Oh, here it is. I won't send it to you in 4K because it'll go like 1 frame a second. So let me just reduce the resolution a bit. Turn on streaming and okay, you ready? Here we go.
Are you simulating whole cities now?
I am.
Nice.
So this is the GSM model, which is the whole city. But yeah, so this is the building down near the convention center. You should know where this is, actually, if you spend any time downtown. I don't know how often you get downtown, but and it just goes on and on. But
So what are you trying to get out of this?
we're just trying to cultivate interest in digital twins. So I basically do consulting with GSM and do a lot of their high-end movie making and projects. So I do real estate. That's why I pay the bills, basically. That's my old. But yeah, that's the marine building, and then there's the harbor center. A little bit of a glint here, and then.
See that you got the correct Vancouver weather too.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So
looking
yes.
forward to playing some first-person shooter game in the streets of Vancouver.
So if you come to SIGGRAPH this year, you can fly around Vancouver in VR. We've actually, I'm working with my team to actually allow you to fly around the city in real time in the model. So that'll be fun.
Nice.
All right, guys. Yeah, let's meet on Wednesday, Rob, and we'll try and come up with something for next week. But thank you so much.
Sounds good. All right.
Okay,
See you guys.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.